powerful changes never come from comfort. They come from rupture, from the breaking of patterns that once held you hostage. And nothing illustrates this better than when the anxious one, who once begged, pleaded, and fought for scraps of connection, finally walks away from the avoidant who always ran. That moment changes everything. It is not just a breakup, it is a revolution. The first change is simple yet brutal. The power flips. For so long, the anxious carried the weight of pursuit. They invested their energy into convincing someone to stay, to commit, to care. They thought if they gave more, loved more, sacrificed more, it would fix the cracks. But when they finally leave, the entire foundation shatters. Suddenly the avoidant, the one who hid, who dismissed, who evaded responsibility, has to confront the silence. No more text to ignore, no more desperate attempts to reassure, just emptiness. And in that emptiness, the power dynamic collapses. The anxious is no longer the beggar. They become the one who chooses, and choice is power. The second change is growth through pain. Walking away isn't easy. The anxious is wired to cling, to hold on until their hands bleed. But when they finally release, they discover something shocking. They survive. The very thing they feared, the loss, the rejection, becomes the door to strength. Their self-worth is no longer tied to whether someone stays or goes. They learn independence not as a cold, isolated thing, but as a fierce reminder, I can stand alone. That lesson transforms them. And for the avoidant, the loss is equally brutal. They believe distance protected them, but distance now delivers pain. They feel what absence really means. The roles invert and growth begins where comfort once paralyzed. The third change is truth replacing illusion. The anxious-avoidant dance is built on lies, on the fantasy that if you just try harder, love deeper, things will fix themselves. It's a cycle of chasing and retreating, of promises never fulfilled. But when the anxious walks away, that fantasy is burned to the ground. No more illusions of maybe one day. No more bargaining with reality. The anxious finally sees that love cannot be sustained by begging. And the avoidant sees that running doesn't prevent loss. It creates it. The truth is harsh, but it is liberating. The cycle ends not in compromise, but in rupture, and only through rupture can reality set in. The fourth change is perhaps the most powerful. Silence speaks louder than need. The anxious once tried to be heard with words, with pleas, with endless explanations. They thought if they just said the right thing, the avoidant would listen. But the greatest impact doesn't come from words. It comes from silence, from no longer reaching out, from absence. That silence screams. It forces reflection. It confronts both parties with the reality of who they are and what they've created. It teaches the anxious that love does not mean losing yourself. And it teaches the avoidant that running doesn't save you from consequences. It only guarantees them. So here is the brutal, unshakable truth. When the anxious finally dumps the avoidant, both lives change forever. The anxious discovers strength, independence, and the power of self-respect. The avoidant confronts emptiness, regret, and the consequences of their avoidance. One learns to rise, the other learns what it means to lose. But this is not just about relationships. It is about every pattern in your life, where you chase what devalues you, where you beg for what refuses to show up, where you cling to what keeps running. Walking away is not weakness. It is the most powerful move you can make, because it says, I will not betray myself for someone else's comfort. Understand this. The moment you stop begging, stop explaining, stop proving your worth to those who cannot see it, you become untouchable. You transform pain into power. You break the chains of dependence. You build a life that no absence can destroy. That is the lesson. That is the change. And here's the warning. Do not wait until you are broken beyond recognition to walk away. Do not waste years begging someone who is committed only to their distance. If you feel yourself shrinking, silenced, erased, leave. The cost of staying is always higher than the cost of walking away. Life is not about convincing others to choose you. It is about choosing yourself so clearly, so unapologetically, that those who cannot rise to meet you fall away. That is strength. That is transformation. That is the revolution that happens when the anxious finally leaves the avoidant. So ask yourself, will you keep chasing, keep begging, keep repeating the cycle that destroys you? Or will you choose to break it, to stand alone, to claim the power that has been yours all along? The anxious one leaving flips the dynamic. It is the single most powerful shift in a toxic relationship cycle because it changes the rules of the game in one instant. For so long, the anxious one is trapped in a role they never chose but kept playing, chasing, proving, apologizing, and begging for the bare minimum. They give too much and receive too little. They cling out of fear, thinking that if they just try harder, love more deeply, compromise more fully, then maybe the avoidant will finally turn around. But when the anxious walks away, when they finally decide their dignity matters more than another unanswered message or another cold shoulder, the world turns upside down. The power flips. That moment is not just a breakup, it's an earthquake. Because the anxious has always been the one holding the bridge together. They poured their energy into keeping the connection alive, while the avoidant kept retreating, testing how far they could withdraw without completely losing it. But once the anxious steps back, once they decide enough, the bridge collapses, and the avoidant, who believed they had endless room to run, suddenly feels the ground crumble beneath them. Silence replaces pursuit. Stillness replaces pleading, and that silence is deafening. For the anxious, leaving is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it goes against every instinct. Their nervous system screams to chase, to hold on, to fix. But liberation comes when they realize the world doesn't end. In fact, it begins. They discover a hidden strength, the ability to breathe without permission, to stand without someone else's reassurance. The dependency that once felt like oxygen suddenly reveals itself as poison. And in the absence of that poison, clarity emerges. The anxious finally sees that their worth was never measured by whether someone stayed or not. Their worth is in their own choice, their own courage, their own decision to stop betraying themselves. For the avoidant, the shift is brutal. For years, they may have believed that intimacy was a trap, that closeness was suffocation, that distance was safety. They ran because they could. They pulled away because they knew the anxious would chase. It was a game with predictable outcomes. But once the anxious leaves, that game ends. The avoidant has no one left to withdraw from, no one left to control with silence, no one left to test. They are left only with themselves, and in that mirror, they find the truth. Distance does not protect you from pain. It creates it. Avoidance does not save you from loss. It guarantees it. The anxious one leaving flips the dynamic because it forces both sides to confront reality. The anxious must confront their own strength. They must sit in the discomfort of silence and realize that neediness never created love. Self-respect does. And the avoidant must confront the cost of running, the emptiness of walls, the hollowness of safety built on distance. This shift is not about revenge, not about proving a point. It's about awakening. The anxious wakes up to their own power, and the avoidant wakes up to their own fear. There is also a deeper lesson here. In life, the dynamic only changes when the one who invests more finally pulls away. Think about it. In work, in friendships, in family, when you're the one overextending, giving without balance, you teach the other person that your energy is infinite. They begin to take it for granted. But when you stop, when you cut the flow, the system is forced to recalibrate. Suddenly, your value is visible not in your presence, but in your absence. And absence is the loudest teacher of all. The anxious one leaving flips the dynamic because it transforms begging into choosing. It turns desperation into discipline. It converts pain into power. For the anxious, it is the first time they taste freedom from the cycle of hope and disappointment. They realize that love should not feel like chasing a ghost. Love should not feel like proving your worth to someone blind to it. Love should not feel like constant anxiety, fear, and exhaustion. By walking away, they declare, I am done trying to squeeze love out of someone who runs from it. That declaration is the start of transformation. And for the avoidant, the silence of the anxious is like a mirror held up to their own emptiness. They finally see that intimacy avoided is intimacy lost. They feel the consequences of their choices, not in words, but in the absence of the one who once held them together. That absence haunts because it reveals the truth they spent so long denying. You cannot outrun the cost of distance. So if you are the anxious one, hear this: your leaving is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. It is the act that flips the dynamic, not only in your relationship, but in your entire life. It is the moment you teach yourself that your value is not in how much you give, but in how much you refuse to betray yourself. And if you are the avoidant, know this: the day the anxious leaves is the day your excuses collapse. You can no longer hide behind the illusion that love is suffocation. You are left with the reality that your walls kept out the very thing you were starving for. The anxious one leaving flips the dynamic because it is the breaking of a cycle. It is the shift from fear to courage, from dependence to freedom, from illusion to truth. It is the moment when everything changes, not because someone else finally chose you, but because you finally chose yourself. Growth emerges from pain. It always has, and it always will. Pain is not the enemy you think it is. It is the very force that shapes you into someone stronger, sharper, and more resilient than you ever imagined. Without pain, there is no urgency to change, no fire to transform, no reason to rise beyond your current limitations. Every breakthrough in your life will be born from discomfort, from heartbreak, from failure, from the moments you swore you could not go on, and yet you did. Pain is the teacher no one wants, but everyone needs. It strips away illusions. It shows you who you are when everything you thought you needed is gone. When you are abandoned, you learn whether your worth was tied to someone else's presence or rooted in your own soul. When you fail, you discover whether you were driven by comfort or by conviction. When you suffer, you are confronted with a choice: to collapse and remain broken, or to rise and become something unrecognizable to the weaker version of yourself. Growth does not come in the comfort of a warm room with everything going your way. It comes in the cold, in the storm, in the silence when no one is coming to save you but yourself. People spend their lives running from pain, avoiding it at all costs, numbing themselves with distractions, addictions, or false comforts. But every time you avoid pain, you also avoid growth. You cannot separate them. They are bound together. If you refuse pain, you refuse transformation. If you numb yourself to suffering, you numb yourself to strength. Growth emerges from pain because it demands that you shed the parts of yourself that no longer serve you. It forces you to let go of weakness, of excuses, of illusions, of the old story that keeps you trapped. Think about the strongest people you know. They did not become that way because life was easy for them. They became strong because life was hard, because they endured betrayal, because they lost people they loved, because they were rejected, abandoned, underestimated, because they had nights when the weight of the world sat on their chest and no one was there to lift it. They became strong not in spite of pain, but because of it. Pain forged them into steel. Pain built their backbone. Pain carved out the depth of their character. The truth is, growth is not gentle. It is violent. It rips apart your comfort zone. It tears down the illusions you built to feel safe. It burns away the old so that the new can be born. It hurts because the old version of you must die for the stronger version to emerge. And that process feels like loss. But it is not loss. It is rebirth. When you are in pain, you are at a crossroads. You can surrender to despair, or you can use it as fuel. You can drown in self-pity, or you can decide that your suffering will not be wasted. Every scar can either be a reminder of weakness or a symbol of survival. Every heartbreak can either be the end of your story or the start of a new one where you rise untouchable. The pain is not optional. You will face it no matter what. What is optional is whether you grow from it or let it destroy you. Do not resent the pain that shaped you. Thank it, because it stripped away the lies you once told yourself. It made you realize who was truly with you and who was never meant to stay. It gave you eyes to see clearly, strength to stand firmly, and courage to walk alone if necessary. Pain purified you. Pain burned away the shallow layers of dependence and left you with something indestructible. Growth emerges from pain because it awakens you to the truth of life. You are capable of far more than you think. You are stronger than the heartbreak. You are tougher than the rejection. You are bigger than the failure. Pain reveals this to you in a way nothing else can. Comfort will never teach you this. Ease will never show you this. Only the fire will. Only the breaking will. So the next time pain comes, do not run. Do not numb yourself. Do not hide. Face it. Let it break you if it must, but refuse to stay broken. Let it carve you into something greater. Let it strip away everything false. Because every time you endure, every time you rise, every time you refuse to quit, you are not just surviving, you are transforming. Remember this, the people who run from pain remain small. The people who face it head on become giants. Growth emerges from pain, but only if you are willing to let it do its work. Let it cut, let it refine, let it strengthen. One day you will look back at your darkest nights and realize they were the foundation of your brightest mornings. Truth over illusion. That is the dividing line between the life you want and the life that destroys you. Illusion is comfortable, seductive, and easy to swallow. It tells you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. It lulls you into complacency, makes you believe things are fine when they are rotting beneath the surface. Truth, on the other hand, is sharp. It cuts, it exposes, it doesn't care about your feelings, and it doesn't bend itself to your comfort. But truth is the only thing that sets you free. Truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a life that doesn't collapse. Illusion whispers, stay, they will change, things will get better. It paints a fantasy of what could be while blinding you to what is. It convinces you that crumbs are a feast, that bare minimum is devotion, that temporary highs are love. Truth interrupts that lie. Truth says they are showing you exactly who they are. Stop pretending not to see it. Truth removes the mask, no matter how badly you want to keep believing in the costume. Truth over illusion means you stop betraying yourself just to keep hope alive. It means you stop pouring your energy into something that only takes from you. It means you stop telling yourself stories about potential and start confronting reality. Illusion feeds your comfort. Truth forces your growth. And the more you cling to illusion, the longer you delay the transformation that pain and honesty demand. Illusion isn't only in relationships, it's everywhere. It's the job you hate but keep because you convince yourself stability is worth your soul. It's the friendships that drain you, but you call them loyalty. It's the habits that destroy you, but you rename them coping. Illusion is deadly because it doesn't feel deadly. It feels safe. But what it actually does is erode you slowly until one day you wake up a stranger to yourself. Truth is never comfortable in the beginning. Facing the truth means admitting that someone you love does not love you the way you need. It means confronting that you wasted years chasing what was never going to be yours. It means acknowledging your own weakness, your own fear, your own role in your suffering. Truth is brutal because it shines a light on everything you wanted to keep hidden. But that is why it's powerful. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you face it, you can no longer pretend. And once you accept it, you can begin again. Illusion will keep you trapped in cycles forever. Truth is the only thing that breaks cycles. When you finally stop lying to yourself about who someone is, you stop chasing ghosts. When you stop lying to yourself about your own bad habits, you stop playing the victim. When you stop lying to yourself about what you really want, you stop wasting your years on things that never mattered. Truth is the blade that cuts the chain. People run from truth because it hurts in the short term. But what they forget is that illusion kills in the long term. Illusion robs you of years. Truth wounds you once, but it heals. Illusion numbs you slowly, and by the time you wake up, you have nothing left. Choosing truth over illusion is not just a mindset, it is survival. It is the only way to stop bleeding out your time, your energy, your soul. Truth will never flatter you. It will never coddle you. It will never let you stay weak. But that is why it matters. Truth doesn't care about how you feel. It cares about what will set you free. The question is, do you want comfort or do you want freedom? Do you want to live inside a fantasy that keeps you chained, or do you want to face reality and finally be able to choose something better? Truth over illusion means you grow up. It means you stop expecting the world to bend to your wishes. It means you accept life as it is and you build strength to face it head on. It means you let go of the childish need to be rescued and embrace the adult responsibility to rescue yourself. Illusion will keep you waiting forever. Truth tells you no one is coming. Get up, move, save yourself. Every breakthrough you want in your life begins with this choice. Will I face truth? Or will I cling to illusion? Will I admit that this relationship is killing me? Or will I keep lying to myself because I fear loneliness? Will I admit that my habits are destroying me? Or will I keep telling myself I deserve just one more escape? Will I admit that my dreams require discipline? Or will I keep pretending that one day things will magically happen? Illusion makes you a prisoner. Truth makes you free, but only if you are brave enough to take it. So stop lying to yourself. Stop romanticizing what hurts you. Stop covering poison with pretty words. Choose truth over illusion, even if it rips your heart out, because once it rips, it will heal. Once it heals, you will be stronger. And once you are stronger, you will realize the illusion was never worth the years you gave it. Truth over illusion. That is the battle. That is the decision that separates those who stay stuck forever from those who rise. Choose truth, even when it hurts, even when it burns, even when it leaves you alone. Because truth may wound you, but illusion will destroy you. Transformation begins when silence speaks louder than need. There comes a point in every person's life when words are no longer enough, when explanations no longer matter, when chasing, convincing, and begging for recognition only strip you of your dignity. Need is loud. It shouts, it pleads, it demands. But silence, chosen silence, carries more power than need ever could. Because silence is not emptiness, it is declaration. It says, I no longer need to prove my worth to you. I no longer need to fight for a place in your world. I choose myself. For too long, people confuse silence with weakness. They think that being quiet means surrender. They believe that not speaking up means defeat. But the truth is the opposite. Silence becomes powerful when it is intentional, when you stop responding to disrespect, when you stop chasing validation, when you stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. That silence is thunder. That silence shakes the ground beneath those who once took your voice for granted. Need drains you. Need hands over your power to someone else. When you need someone to love you, to stay, to validate you, you are placing your worth in their hands. And once they sense your need, they hold the power. They can withdraw and you collapse. They can ignore you and you crumble. That is the slavery of need. But when you choose silence instead of begging, you reclaim your freedom. Silence says, you cannot control me with your absence anymore. My worth does not depend on your presence. Transformation begins here, when silence carries more weight than need. Because in silence, you learn self-control. You learn that not every impulse deserves to be acted on. You learn that chasing what runs only exhausts you. You learn that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not made with your mouth, but with your absence. Silence teaches discipline. It teaches patience. It teaches restraint, and restraint is strength. Think of the anxious one who always chased the avoidant. Their needs screamed, their words poured out, they explained, justified, begged, pleaded. But the moment they fall silent, everything changes. The dynamic flips. Suddenly, the avoidant is left with emptiness. There are no texts to ignore, no calls to reject, no cries to dismiss. Just silence. And that silence forces confrontation. It makes absence louder than presence ever did. It forces recognition of what was once overlooked. That is why transformation begins in silence, because silence forces others to face themselves. But this is not only about relationships. It's about every area of life where your need once made you weak. When you need people to approve of you, you bend yourself into a shape that pleases them. But when you go silent, when you stop performing, stop proving, stop explaining, you reclaim your shape. You become solid. You become unshakable. When you need comfort, you cling to distractions, you run from pain. But when you face the silence, when you sit in the stillness without escaping, transformation happens. The silence forces you to meet yourself, to see your flaws, your fears, your truths. And in meeting yourself, you finally begin to grow. Silence is the crucible of transformation. It is where you separate what is essential from what is noise. It is where you learn the difference between desire and dependence. It is where you build the backbone that need always kept weak. In silence, you learn that you can survive without what you thought you couldn't live without. You realize that the world does not collapse when you stop chasing. You realize that your breath does not depend on someone else's presence. That realization is the foundation of freedom. Need is loud, but it is hollow. Silence is quiet, but it is solid. When you no longer need to explain yourself to those who don't listen, you reclaim time. When you no longer need to chase those who run, you reclaim energy. When you no longer need to beg for love, you reclaim dignity. That reclamation is the essence of transformation because you stop living as a beggar and start living as a builder. You stop waiting for someone else to complete you and begin completing yourself. Do not mistake silence for passivity. It is not withdrawal, it is strategy. It is the deliberate act of refusing to feed what starves you. It is the conscious decision to invest in yourself rather than pour into a void. It is the turning point between being controlled by others and controlling yourself. Transformation does not begin with noise, with dramatic speeches, with endless declarations. Transformation begins with the stillness of silence that says, I no longer need to prove. I no longer need to plead. I am enough without this. And here is the paradox. When your silence speaks louder than your need, you often gain what you once begged for. Because nothing is more magnetic than someone who does not beg. Nothing is more powerful than someone who walks away quietly, without drama, without noise, just self-respect. That silence haunts those who lost you. It lingers longer than words ever could, but the true power is not in haunting them. It is in freeing yourself. So remember this, your silence is not weakness. It is power. It is discipline. It is dignity. Transformation begins when you no longer scream for attention, when you no longer chase validation, when you no longer explain your worth. Transformation begins when you go silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because your silence already says everything. Transformation begins when silence speaks louder than need, and in that silence, you finally hear yourself and you finally become unstoppable.